Truth and Tea with the Urban Evangelist. Welcome to Truth and Tea with the Urban Evangelist.
Hi there, I'm the Urban Evangelist, and welcome back to the Truth and Tea podcast, where we filter every single conversation through the lens of faith. And today we are dealing with a very heavy topic, which is to do with surviving abuse in a family setup. Given the fact that we're living in a fallen world, there are many unpleasant things that we have to deal with, things which cause varying types of pain, things which must be confronted, however painful and uncomfortable they might be. Within the church, one such cause of pain, which does not really get the attention it needs, is the abuse of women and children within the home and even in Christian homes. The church still seems to be struggling to bring this issue into the light, and there's still the vast need for it to realize the prevalence and severity of the abuse that occurs within even its own midst. It's a silence that needs to be broken, both from the side of the individual being abused and from the side of the church confrontation of the issue. This silence is difficult to break, especially for an individual facing abuse. So if the church is to effectively minister to those suffering from abuse within the home, it's imperative that those in the church, that includes you and I, become familiar with what it is that keeps the abused silent in their suffering. And today I am so honored by the presence of this very special guest, in the sense that she's actually here to also talk about her own experience, how she overcame it, how she's raising a godly family, but also because she loves the body of Christ so much that she chose not to remain silent. You know her as an award-winning gospel artist. She's Zambia's sweetheart. It's Chileshe Bwalya Mumba, and she said, say it that way because it's from the East. It's funny, because I always thought that Mumba was, from Bembaland?
I know.
Yeah, until you schooled me today.
Right, a lot of people actually assume that, but there's actually Mumba from the east and Mumba from the north.
Okay,
yeah,
so you are definitely east.
Hubby's
east.
Yeah, so because I have the Chileshe Bwalya, also actually Chileshe Bwalya, people automatically assume.
Exactly. Yeah. I hear you. Okay, so we've clarified that, got it all cleared up, but just in the spirit of names, I also learned that your children have very interesting meanings to their names. Could you care to just share that?
Okay, so we have Judah, who is praise, obviously, and we gave him the name Judah because we're just praising God for him. We absolutely didn't plan for him.
Wow.
So we just gave thanks to God. And then we have Yada, which Yada means worship with your hands extended. Drawing back to the story where Moses was on the mountain with his hands raised in worship. So that is where Judah and Yada come from, which is praise and worship.
And like, how cool is that? No, it's pretty cool. Like, you guys are deep like that.
It's funny because Judah is Judah Yira Mumba. So Judah, Yira means the fear of God. So it's praise with the fear of God. And then Yada is Yada Adale Mumba, which is Adale means noble. So it's noble worship.
Incredible. Yeah. I will not be surprised if those kids have a musical gene.
They absolutely love music.
They do, right?
They love the drums. Yada loves to sing. Yeah.
It's in the name, praise and worship.
Yeah.
But while we're speaking of children and names, take us through a young Chileshe growing up in the home. What was that like?
I was a very, very bubbly child.
Okay.
For a good 6 years, I was the youngest until my little brother came in from ShopRite.
in a plastic bag.
As the story goes. But I guess from a certain point, I became a little bit rebellious. And I was that child who was like the black sheep of the family. And it all...
Black sheep of the... I can't put that together. Okay, just how many siblings do you have?
I have six.
Okay.
Yes.
And you were the black sheep.
I was
out of the six.
I was the childhood that.
Wow.
Really? Yeah. I mean, it all stems from a story that I've constantly shared about going through abuse.
Right.
And I think between 6 and 7, I experienced abuse from a very close family member.
Right.
And it kind of shaped the person that I became from that point on, because it was difficult for me to talk about it. So the best way for me to release that whatever negative energy I was feeling, or like trying to take power of my life, is just to become, in a sense, rebellious.
Right, right.
Yeah, so
that was that your way of like dealing with the pain?
I guess so. I mean, the person that abused me put me in a position where they said, I'm going to kill your mother if you tell anybody.
Wow.
And you're telling this to a 6-year-old, and my mother was my life. So I'm thinking, is it worth going to her and talking about this, you know?
Because I may just lose her.
Exactly. So for a long time, I wasn't able to talk about it. I only came out about it when I was 18. Yeah, I eventually wrote my dad a letter.
Yeah.
And I explained what had happened.
Yeah.
And it was a very healing moment for me.
Right.
Yeah, but it affected a lot of who I was, obviously, in the sense that how I related, even getting into relationships as a teenager, I kind of wanted to take power of my sexuality. And in a sense, I was more so hurting myself than I was taking power. And I feel like this happens to a lot of young people, where you feel like, I want to be in control. I want to be in control of the relationship. You become promiscuous.
Yeah.
Others will totally close up and just, you know, end up maybe even getting into marriage and not being able to give themselves up to their partner.
Exactly.
But for me, it was the total opposite. And I come to realize now that, you know, had I been able to talk about it a lot earlier, I would have been probably made a whole lot of decisions differently than I did. Otherwise, I did have, I would say, a safe childhood, because at a certain point, obviously, this person, without my parents knowing, was taken out of my environment. But then at the same time, it still affected who I became. It still affected the relationship that I had with my parents, especially my dad, because in as much as it wasn't his fault, I still kind of, in the back of my head, sort of blamed him, like, where were you when this was happening? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And even him is like, why are you behaving this way? I have not raised you like this. But then he doesn't understand
why
the backstory of it. So yeah, we got to a point. One time he was scolding me, and I just grabbed him in the collar.
You grabbed your dad? How old were you?
I think I was 14
wow.
at the time. I grabbed him and I screamed in his face, and he couldn't believe it. But then this was the demons I was dealing with at the time, I would call it. Yeah.
Right. And that definitely sounds like a lot of pent-up anger that you had.
Right.
But I still want to take you back to the fact that this abuse happened when you were 6.
Right.
So would it be right to say that you pretty much enjoyed only 6 years of innocence before somebody took that away from you?
Right.
And then it began to affect you from that point onwards?
Exactly. Because I was being groomed into the abuse. It was a process of first being bought sweets and whatnot, being shown pornographic videos and things like that, and being made to seem like this is normal in a sense, even though I remember vividly feeling that this is not okay, this should not be happening, this is not right. So yeah, my innocence definitely was taken away, because now you kind of become curious to understand what is this process, and you're 6-7-year-old, you're growing up, you're learning, seeing a whole lot more other things, you know, and then you almost want to start functioning like an adult, even though you're a little child.
At 6 and 7, most people, well, adults, can hardly remember what they were doing, you know, at that point in their life. But the fact that you can recall so vividly might perhaps speak to the fact that, you know, there was an imprint of trauma in your life that you just can't seem to shake off. And so how long did that go on for, that situation?
You know, what's funny is I actually remember things from as far back as 3 years old.
Really?
That's how bad it was, because from that point on, I would have nightmares literally every day. It's like a recollection of the incidences happening every day. I can't count how many times it happened, but then there's specific moments that I would remember that this happened. But I would dream about it up until the point that I actually talked about it. I dreamt about it literally every day.
So that whole time you dealt with the pain and the suffering of abuse all by yourself. You carried that with you.
Yeah. I'd never told anybody, not even my closest friends in high school.
Nobody knew.
Nobody knew. Yeah. Until I decided to write the letter to my dad, because I also noticed, I think when I noticed that it really, really did affect the relationships that I had even with the opposite sex.
Yeah.
I realized that a lot of bad decisions I had made, I just needed to do it for myself more than anything, and kind of make my dad understand that this is what I've been dealing with. And for him, he had this, he kind of felt like he failed me. Like, how have I failed in raising this child? But I wanted to also sort of like assure him that it's not exactly your fault.
Yeah.
Yeah, but obviously, what really, really made me open up was my mom went through training for psychosocial counseling, and she kind of changed her approach to parenting after she did that, because
How she handled you?
Right.
Okay.
Because they were the typical African parents.
Yes.
If you mess up, they whip you,
Yes.
they'll scold you, and they'll shout at you. But then she after going through the counseling training, she started to ask more questions, like sit down with you and be like, talk to me. What is causing this behavior? What is it that you're dealing with? And I started to feel safe enough to go to them. And I guess even a part of me failed to talk about it, because you kind of feel like, are they even going to believe me? You know, especially if you've done so much wrong.
Right.
And you kind of be like, they'll probably think I'm just trying to make up a story and whatnot. But then once she started to do that, where she would sit us down and just try and have a conversation with us, I realized, okay, this is a safe space.
Yeah.
And that has affected how I'm doing parenting now. I decided to, from the beginning, be able to create an environment where my kids feel safe enough, even when they're messed up, to come and talk to me about it.
That's very important. We're talking abuse in a family setup, and just to get a better understanding of what the dynamics were at the time, was it an extended family setup, and how was the abuser introduced into your family?
So we did have a couple of people that were living with us.
Okay.
My siblings, obviously, but then there was also other family members that joined us. I don't like to specifically mention who the person is. Of course. But there were...
And that's fine. We can just keep it as is.
Right.
Yeah.
There were a person, obviously, that was brought in to be kept in the family.
Okay.
And I guess even in the sense, you know, when you're a parent and you're keeping people and you trust people, you're going to leave the kids and feel like, oh, you don't think in your head that this person is capable of doing something like this. But it did happen, unfortunately, not only to me, even to another family member as well. So it's
by the same person.
By the same person, yeah. So I know it was very hard for my parents also, coming to the realization that, oh my goodness, we left our kids in the hands of this person, trusting them, believing that they're going to be a source of security, and this person turned out to be the person that hurt them. So yeah, it now it's difficult to even trust even just the helper, you know what I mean? It could be anybody. I've grown up and I've had conversations with girls who've been abused by females, you know, so now it's like, who do you trust?
And if I may ask, this was a male family member in your case?
Yes,
because you're right. I mean, abuse does happen at both the hands of male and female individuals.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was a male, and
no, please go on.
Yeah. It makes trusting people difficult. But then again, when we go back to the Word of God, God asks us to trust Him. He doesn't ask us to trust people. So you kind of just have to trust God and be consistently prayerful over your children, because you can't carry them everywhere you go. Yeah.
On the trust issue, you've brought your father up a lot, and he seems to have been the object, or the person rather, that a lot of your anger was directed towards. Would there be any particular reason why your dad specifically? I mean, you have a set of parents, but why more on your dad was the anger directed?
My dad was like my best friend.
Okay.
From, I think, from being a baby up until, 6, 7, 8 years old.
So you were daddy's girl?
Yes.
Okay.
He was my best friend. So when I started to retaliate, it brought a drift between us. And I guess in a sense, I felt like I wanted him to fight for me rather than fight me. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does.
So it really affected the relationship that I had with him for the longest time. And he's the one who reacted the most to my behavior. He's the one who would whip me more. He's the one who would scold me more. So it really did bring a drift between us. My mom was a little bit more understanding, I guess. Or maybe she just had more patience. So I still stayed close to her, over the years, But we've mended our relationship.
Okay. Okay.
We've totally mended our relationship, and I think now he has a better understanding of who I am. Even just seeing who I've become now, it makes him really happy because when the moment when I told him, when he found out, he was so angry. We literally had to pray for him not to go and murder somebody. Yeah, because he was angry with himself for not knowing all along, for not being able to protect me. And then he was also angry with the person, obviously, that had done it. Yeah.
And the person that had done it while you were living under the same roof, how were you relating to them despite what they were doing to you? Would you try and act normal and just cover up what was going on? Would you try and put out some signals of sorts that, listen, I need help, don't leave me alone with this person?
I think so with the grooming, I feel like because it almost becomes normal, as a kid, you kind of get used to that environment. So I acted normal around everybody else. Yeah, even just feeling defeated in a sense, when you're left alone, you kind of just surrender and be like, okay, this is about to happen. It's going to happen. It's part of my everyday life now. So let me just go ahead and live it. Yeah.
That's heartbreaking.
It is.
It's heartbreaking.
Because you're a kid.
Yeah.
I can't even now I look at my 7-year-old son, I don't think I'm able to have a conversation with him where I can tell him, this is how you handle the situation. He's just going to be like, what are you talking about? So I try my best to tell him what's normal and what's not normal, what he should report, But then you can't really go into the deepest of details with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the midst of all this, was there any point where there was a backdrop of God set in your life?
I believe so.
You're a gospel singer now, and where did you begin to kind of draw some of these things out of yourself, despite the rough start?
Excuse me. I believe there's a point when, growing up, in my teens especially, there's a point when I really wanted to give up. So we grew up in church. Every Sunday we religiously went to church. I may not have had a proper understanding of what the relationship with God is about, or who Christ is. But one thing I remember vividly is how I never, every time somebody talked about hell, I never wanted to go to hell. Exactly. So there's a point when I really was so frustrated and I wanted to end it all. But I remembered somebody saying, if you kill yourself, it's considered murder and you go straight to hell. So every time I would feel like I don't want to live anymore, I'd beg God, Lord, take me, because I don't want to end my own life and go to hell. And I think God used that to save me, because it would have been very easy for me to just do something that would have ended my life. Yeah. But ultimately, I would pray and just be like, okay, God, I don't want to wake up tomorrow. Please take me. And then I would wake up and be so pissed off, because I'm like, why are you not hearing me? But
we're glad that prayer wasn't answered.
I really, really thank God, because also going through the journey of music, what really led me to getting saved was the music itself. I actually used to find a lot of comfort in singing and music. It was it was sort of an identity that God gave me that would make me stand out. So it would be birthday parties that would call me out to sing. It would be school talent shows and things like that. That was like a safety space for me. It gave me sort of like a different identity from just being the girl who's been abused.
Yeah.
So when I went through pursuing a career in music and God basically blocked every secular avenue, I went back to God and I was like, okay, so what do you want me to do with this? And God was like, sing to the Lord a new song. And I thank God, because that's what brought me to where I am today.
Right. Now, before we get to that part of you, you mentioned that there was someone else in the home that was also abused. At what point did you both find out that you had gone through the same thing, or perhaps similar?
I found out a few years ago, actually.
Is it?
Yeah, a few years ago is when they talked about it, when they came out and said, I actually also went through this.
Yeah.
You know, and it's really heartbreaking, because I feel like had we both known, it may also have helped with the outcome of it. It would have been easy to be like, listen, we've both gone through this, let's go talk to
our parents
about it. Yeah.
So there really was the fear element reinforced by the perpetrator.
Right.
Yeah, obviously, I mean, you're a young, malleable mind at the time, and anything that you're told, it passes, and it's coming from an adult.
Right.
Yeah.
You absolutely believe it, and it's really scary, which is why I'll sit down my son and just, even when he comes and says, oh, a friend of mine did this, before I even get up and go and deal with whatever is happening at school, I will tell him, you have the authority to stand up for yourself and say no to this, or go tell your teacher, I don't like this, I don't like how you're speaking to me. So because I want him to feel comfortable to call out when things are wrong, and he should also feel comfortable enough to come and tell me, even if he was wrong in the situation. If something is done to him, he should be able to come and talk to me about it. Yeah.
So now you're a teen, and you're rebellious, and you're angry, and you're getting into relationships.
Right.
Who are you angriest at the most at that point?
I think I've never really processed that, but I think mostly my dad.
It was still your dad?
It was still my dad. I feel like I didn't really think about it, but when I did have an opportunity to speak to him is when I felt the most relief. So I guess I would say I was mostly angry at him. And maybe a little bit with myself. Because in the moment, I'm thinking, why didn't I help myself? I don't know why I blamed myself to an extent, but then I did feel angry at myself. When I look back, I really did wish that I had an opportunity to make certain decisions differently. But then again, I'm also grateful because now I'm able to talk about this and be able to help other people. Because sometimes I ask myself, if I didn't go through it, it could have been anybody else. And would I wish this on my worst enemy? No, I wouldn't. But I thank God that I've survived it. And other people can survive it too, because I'm able to talk about it.
You went through something that you had no control over, Chileshe. You had something taken away from you that perhaps you would have even loved to preserve, you know, for the right person. And oftentimes we hear that victims of abuse tend to have misplaced guilt and shame. Did you experience any of that?
Absolutely. I used to feel like I wasn't good enough. You know, I had conversations with my fellow teenagers, and they'll come and talk about how, you know, they're virgins and things like that, and you kind of feel like, oh my goodness, I'm messed up. I can't have that. I can't, you know, experience that first time. It was taken. I don't have power to control that situation. And like I said, it affected how I even perceived myself as a female, and also just how I handled relationships with guys. So there was a lot of guilt. There was a whole lot of guilt. And I've forgiven myself for it. I thank God that I've had the opportunity to forgive myself for it, because...
And it was very misplaced.
Right.
Yeah. Because if we call it what it is, somebody sinned against you, Chileshe. They violated you. Yeah. So the guilt was not yours to begin with, to carry and bear.
That's very true. And I think a lot of people need to hear that. A lot of people need to understand that you have no control over the situation. You can't really blame yourself. Sometimes people will say, no, you shouldn't have been in this place. You shouldn't have, but then somebody has no right over it, no matter what the circumstances are. As long as you haven't allowed them, you haven't given them authority to your space. They have no place doing anything that you haven't allowed anybody to do.
Absolutely. Now, one thing about how we take control back is our response to things that we've got zero control over. Right. And so you mentioned earlier on that at 18, you then spoke about it for the first time.
Right.
Take us through that. How did that happen? And what shifted in you to bring about the need to just let it all out and let it be known?
Right. Like I said, my mom had gone through the whole psychosocial counseling training.
Yeah. And
I feel like that allowed me to feel like I can go to my parents and be able to, you know, open up to them. But I remember, if I remember correctly, I had gotten into some form of altercation with my dad. I think it was about my school results or something.
Okay.
And I felt like he needs to know. I think he needs, because he was going off about what is wrong with you, la-di-da, la-di-da, and he was calling relatives and just complaining about me. And I said, I think he needs to know and he needs to understand why I am the way I am, because it's going to keep drawing us further and further apart if he doesn't know. So, and I also just felt like at that point, it doesn't, like, if he doesn't believe me, I'd gotten to a point where I said, if he doesn't believe me, it's okay, but I'm going to let him know. So when I wrote the letter and he eventually found it, I put it under his pillow. He eventually found it.
I can imagine what the day was like for you, just waiting, looking for telltale signs of, has he seen it? Has he read it?
Right. I was very, very anxious. And I've not seen my father break down before until that point. He just went really quiet. He didn't know what to say to me.
Did he read it in your presence?
No. He had read
called
it before.
You.
Yeah.
Okay.
After we spoke, he had read it. And he came and said, I saw the letter, and I'm really sorry that, you know, you went through this. And he was really angry. He wanted to he was on the copper belt at the time. He wanted to get up and come to Lusaka. He was ready to murder somebody.
Yeah.
And I had to just beg him and say, you don't need to do that. I feel like God has his way of, I had an opportunity to go and report this person to the police and all of that, but his life itself just showed the consequences of his actions.
Okay.
And I felt like there's really nothing more I can add to this. God has dealt with him, so I don't want to have to go through that process. And he made an attempt to apologize.
What did that look or sound like?
It was a phone call, and he said, "Oh, I heard that I'm the reason why things haven't gone the way they're supposed to go." And I was quiet, and he hung up, and that was it.
Wow.
And that was it. And we've never had a conversation about it since. I later on had to realize that I may never get
an apology.
So if I'm going to forgive, I have to do it for me. Yeah.
Has that been easy, forgiving him, especially that there's been very little signs of remorse? And I know that sometimes what hurts a bit more is when your offender seems to
move on.
Right. I know in your case, you know, there's been some consequences, you know, like how his life has turned out.
Right.
But there could be someone watching this, listening in, and their offender seems to be getting away with it and just living like nothing happened, no consequences of their action.
I think to an extent, they won't always show you what's happening in their mind. You know, sometimes it might look like they're okay physically, but you don't know what's going on in their mind. And I never ever discourage anybody from going to authorities, no matter how long it's taken. I always encourage, go and report this person. If you have to deal with them by the law, please do. Just because I didn't doesn't mean you don't have to. You can do it, and there are people who are willing to sit down and listen, and the authorities will go through whatever processes they need to. It wasn't easy having to forgive without getting an apology, but I realized that it was the moment when I realized that forgiveness generally is more for yourself than for the other person, is when it kind of like made it easy. I've had one encounter with him since, and he really tried to act normal, and I just said, you know what, there's no point in me ruining my day because of this one person. And I just lived through the day thank God I've not had to interact with him so much.
I'm sorry, I have to ask, was it at a family gathering?
It was a family,
okay.
It was a family gathering,
Okay.
so he was there, he was present.
Okay.
And yeah, he really, really tried to act normal. And I guess I didn't really treat him badly, but I also just didn't try and interact so much. Yeah.
That's very gracious of you, actually, if I must say that.
Right.
Yeah.
I needed it for my own healing, actually. I needed it for my own healing. And I'm sad that he's going through what he's going through also. But at the end of the day, there are consequences to our actions and the decisions that we make. And
Absolutely.
if you're not remorseful even, unfortunately, things won't always turn out.
Wow. Speaking of grace, do you find that you're a bit more gracious towards the black sheep in a family? That child that gets told, this one is a problem.
Absolutely. I feel like that's where my ministry has taken me a lot.
Is it?
I've become the person who wants to hear that person out more than... I'm gonna... When everybody's walking away from them, I'm the one who's gonna be like, listen, there has to be something that's causing this. Like, talk to me. And I thank God because people actually end up opening up about whatever it is that they're going through. There's always something that triggers certain behaviors in people. And others, it may not be sexual abuse. It may just be other things, other traumas that they've experienced. But I do have a lot of grace for the black sheep. Yeah. It's backfired sometimes because sometimes it's just bad decisions. Right. But most of the times, if not 99% of the time, there's always a trigger that causes that behavior.
So would you then say that it becomes imperative to just dig a little deeper to a child that's, I don't know if it's suddenly or it's gradually just starts to behave very differently and there's just a huge departure from their character?
Right. It's really, really important to actually sit a child down, make them feel safe. That's very important because most of the times everybody's just like, what's wrong with you? What is happening with you? And so they tend to close up. But when you create an environment that makes them feel safe, because remember also when somebody is being abused or treated badly, it's usually in a space where they felt safe. So already everything doesn't feel safe anymore after they've gone through that trauma. So now you kind of need to reassure them that, look, I'm here for you. I'm not here to hurt you just like everybody else. Because that's where the rebellion comes from. For me, I remember dumping somebody because I felt like they became too nice. Like,
really? Why? So you really were just not trusting of anyone. So even someone being nice was suspicious to you.
Exactly. Like if you become too nice and like, you probably want something. If you're being too good to me, you probably want something. And it took time for me to actually break that mentality. And that's why when I look at the track record of even relationships I was in before my husband, it was usually the bad boys, the people who were just going to treat me badly.
Was it gangster love? Gotta ask.
I guess you would call it that. Yeah, because my husband is a total opposite. He's a very gentle person. He's a very patient person, and he's...
And I was going to ask, like, so how did you now finally arrive at Mr. Nice Guy? You were very suspicious, you know, like in your previous years in the past, and then now you've met this.
I believe it was just God showing me that I deserve love. I deserve to be treated well.
Did you actually feel undeserving?
Right.
Is that why you also rejected it?
Yes, a part of it was just kind of feeling like if we're bad to each other, I don't owe you a perfect me.
I see.
You know what I mean? I don't owe you a good me.
Yeah.
So we can just both be gangster.
Right.
Gangster. Yeah. So when I gave my life to God, God showed me that, you know, He has mercy and He is forgiving and He is loving, and I needed to forgive myself also. And God started to show me that this is how I've designed life to be for you. It's supposed to be beautiful. It's supposed to be good. Even whoever you end up in marriage with is supposed to be somebody who loves you and cares for you and is gentle and patient with you. And so I thank God because I'm able to embrace that. And yeah.
That's beautiful.
I see it as God's love towards me.
Yeah.
I honestly see my husband's love as God's love.
An extension of it.
Right.
And is this something that, obviously you've shared this with him, I mean, if you're going to speak about it at Truth and Tea.
Absolutely. I did. I actually opened up to him just before we got married.
Okay,
and it kind of led to, you know, a couple of people being chucked off the wedding list.
Wow, I can,
He was very hurt about it, but I thank God he also showed a lot of grace and towards me at least, anyway. He was hurt. He was hurt that I went through that. He was sad, but it was difficult for him to process having to see the person. So he just said, I can understand that. And I was like, okay.
So he was definitely crossed out.
Yeah, crossed out of
I can understand that.
Yeah.
I think anybody can understand that. It would be a very big ask, really.
I know. It's a lot. And I think even more so now that we have a daughter, I think because I mean, abuse is happening both to boys and girls. But obviously, because I've experienced it as a girl, having a daughter has kind of like, I've noticed my husband is very protective of our daughter. So, yeah.
Would you say that perhaps what you went through, is there any impact of that you've carried into how you're parenting and, you know, securing your home? I mean, would you bring in anybody into your home?
Absolutely. It's had a lot of impact, and I have one incident where I think my son was 2 or 3 years old, had a nanny, and there's just a certain behavior that I noticed with my son, and I asked him, where are you learning this? And he mentioned that the nanny had been teaching him to do this, and I automatically just said, you know what, you need to leave. And she tried to say, no, he's lying, he's a kid. And I said, look, if he's not telling the truth, if he's just being a kid, I'd rather believe him than keep you around him.
And take that chance in the event that he was actually being truthful.
Exactly. And I said to her, if what he's saying is not true, you're going to just have to forgive me, but I can't keep you in my home. So I'm very cautious about the things that I see around my kids, the things I hear. I will straight up tell my nannies now, like, don't speak to my children like this. Don't violate their space. If they're uncomfortable with something, don't force them to do it. Because I want them to know that they should be able to say no. They should be able to feel safe. Just because you're an adult doesn't mean that they should do everything that you say that they must do. And bringing people into my space, I'm very, very cautious about who I bring into my space.
How do you feel about extended family?
It's the ups and the downs. You know, there's days when I'm like, okay, it was great when we were growing up to an extent, because you kind of had a whole lot of help. But then at the same time, it's just difficult to trust 100%, you know. But even now, I do have a live-in nanny, but it's something I pray about. I pray for God to give me peace and to protect my children also when I'm not around. Because I don't want to also just walk around every day thinking, oh my gosh, something bad is going to happen. You might end up projecting that into, you know, their lives. So I try very hard to just understand that I can't keep them and cover them. I can only cover them to a certain extent. The rest is really up to God. I just also want to break the cycle, because I know I've heard stories from my mom, her sisters, and things like that. So you kind of see even a pattern, but I want that cycle to be broken in my life.
You just touched on your mom, and I remember earlier on, as you were chatting, you said you're now in a good place.
Right.
Did you have a difficult relationship with her?
With my mom, not so much.
Not so much.
She's always been very nurturing.
Okay.
It was just, I think, failing to tell her because of the fear of what could happen to her.
I see.
If I do tell her.
Okay.
She was also a very huge disciplinarian, yes. But I was always close to her.
Okay.
It's just, it became easier to talk to her after she was now sitting down and saying, can we have a conversation, as opposed to smacking you with the whip. Are
you very sparing when it comes to the rod? I mean, they're young, obviously, your children, but I mean, has your own experience helped guide what you can do?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes I think it's necessary. My husband, on the other hand, we haven't necessarily established what we want in that area. My husband he likes to make me be bad cop.
Okay. I play a lot of bad cop too.
Yeah, he's never whipped.
But when he turns bad cop, it's really bad.
Exactly.
I then now have to almost like be the buffer, like, okay, let's calm down a bit.
It takes a lot to get him to bad cop, but then I'm mostly bad cop. I'm the one who's getting, and sometimes he even say, I'm going to call your mom. I'm like, but why are you putting me in front of this as the bad guy? Yeah, but I wanted to not have to whip my kids, but sometimes it's necessary. Yeah,
I hear you, sis. I hear you.
I can count the number of times I've done it, I think. Yeah, but I tried to just be able to have conversations. Because I remember one incident where I was not feeling well and I'm lying down in bed, and then we didn't have a maid that time. So Judah, I just heard a glass break. So I got up and I'm like, what's going on? What are you doing? And he says, can I please say what I need to say? And he's begging me to just talk, and I was going on and on. So eventually I said, okay, fine, speak. And he says, no, I was just trying to bring you a glass of water.
Oh, look at that.
And I sat down, and it took me back to the number of times that our parents didn't hear us when we were trying to explain. So now I'm more like, okay, what caused this situation? Even if I'm going to whip him at the end of it.
Exactly. Let me understand.
I still want to hear, what happened, what led up to this, so that he still is able to talk to me. And sometimes he'll even, like, Judah will call me out on certain things, like, you didn't ask to do this. Like, even if I pick food out of his plate, he'll be like, but you need to ask politely. So I'm like, okay, because
he's now schooling you.
Teach him boundaries, so
which are very important.
Exactly.
Yeah, because they keep the good in and the bad out.
Right.
Yeah. Your music, I know artists tend to be inspired a lot by what they've been through. Is there any part of your music that touches on what you've come out of in terms of abuse?
Absolutely.
Did you pen any specific songs?
Absolutely. There's a song called Mumutende, which pretty much in the bridge I talk about I was used and abused, but the world didn't come to my rescue. Stripped of my pride at a tender age, I was broken. I wrote it very poetically. I think that's
it's incredible how that is one of my favorite songs by you. And until we've had this discussion, and now you're saying the lyrics to me, now it makes sense. Like, I fully understand. Wow.
Yeah, so it goes on to say, now I'm drowning in sin till God came and rescued me. I think stemming from the abuse, a lot of my sinful nature, sinful lifestyle came from that, and it really took God to come and show me that, look, there's a whole new life, and once I've forgiven you, the past doesn't really matter. Because, like you see, you had asked about guilt earlier, and I dealt with that a lot. Like, do I even deserve? Sometimes even my husband, I'll be like, do I even deserve this guy after the life that I've lived, before this? But then the Bible tells us that love keeps no record of wrong, and this is just who God is, and I'm grateful for that. And that's why I wrote that song, because I experienced that unconditional love from God.
Wow.
Yeah.
You should see me. I've got goosebumps right now. Like, such a beautiful and incredible testimony. And just one last thing. I will ask you to do something for me, though, which is very different from what I've ever asked anybody. How do you keep reconciling God's love in moments where you might feel unworthy? I know that our sanctification is an ongoing process, but I know sometimes, the devil is the accuser in the sense that he never stops. He's always trying to throw something at us, exactly, and not necessarily pertaining to you, but anybody that is, caught up in that cycle of shame and feeling unworthy, either of God's love or even just another human being's love. How do you, first of all, reconcile to God? And then how do you just stay rooted in the identity that He's given you? Yeah. What would you just put out there as encouragement based on how you got out of a very sticky place?
I think it's trying to consistently maintain communion with God. Because his word always reminds us of his love towards us. His word is constantly speaking to us. And I know in Philippians, the Bible tells us to think about the things that are good, lovely, the things that are true, that are noble. And I think for the most part, when the enemy comes and he's accusing you, it brings that anxiety, and which is why the Bible tells us to be anxious for nothing. And you start to feel like, do I even deserve these good things? Do I even deserve? But then the Bible tells us that we must think on the good things that God has set out in front of us. And I think that's what has kept me, consistently just trying to remind myself that God loves me. Yeah. He loves me and he never stops. Sometimes people will bring up stuff from the past. Now I'm able to laugh about it, I'm able to make jokes about it because I'm like, look, God doesn't even have that in his record.
And it's also a very good sign of healing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So even just being able to talk about the abuse like this, it wasn't easy in the beginning, but now sometimes I'll run my mouth about it. Like it was just like it was, I don't even know how to put it.
I hear like it was a light issue, which it really isn't.
And people will be like, how are you able to talk about it? I'm like, because I've learned to, embrace the forgiveness that God had towards me, and also just be able to forgive the other person that, that did this to me. Because at the end of the day, if I continue to live in that, I'm not accepting God's love that he has put in front of me. Right.
Wow. He saved you for a time like this, and I'm going to take full advantage of it. So I'll do something first. I need to close. And I will say my thank yous, but I just want you to know, if you're watching, that you can catch this show on Monday at 8 a.m. on Radio Christian Voice. And do also check out the video uploads on YouTube. You can just search Radio Christian Voice and the Urban Evangelist and subscribe so that you do not miss any notification for conversations that we filter through faith. Now, Chileshe, I will say thank you very much for pouring out of your cup and ministering to us and showing us that God can turn a mess into a message and pain into purpose, and every single test can be a testimony if we allow him to use it. Now, this gift that he's given you and that song that you wrote from a place of, despair and being lost. Right. Could you just sing the chorus for us for Mumutendi? Like, we're turning this into an acoustic set. And we'll close off in style, but please, it's over to you. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. It's really, really been an honor to be able to share this. And I pray that, somebody finds healing through this. So, Mumutendi wenu Yahweh. Emoke kalila omobashi wenu Yahweh eulenchingilila jikatisheni pantamaka yenu Ealen kosele shayawe chikatisheni.
Woo! Wow.
Thank you for doing amazing things. Thank you so much for this platform. It's really a blessing. Thank you.
All right, and that has been Truth and Tea with the amazing Chileshe Bwalya. Mumba? Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.